Today's guest is not one, as I've alluded to, but two, and they are no strangers to coaching conversations because, in fact, they were both with me earlier this year in February. Now, February's coaching conversation was so popular, with both of them giving great tips and advice, that we decided to continue the conversation during this month, which, as we know, is dedicated to men's mental health. So Darren, our first guest, is the founder of Front Foot Life Coaching, and he's worked for over 20 years in the sports and leisure sector, starting off as a local authority sports development officer, then working for national organisations such as Sport England and the Football Association. And he now coaches senior executives, CEOs and sports people to help them get, as he puts it very cleverly, on the front foot, and specialising in particular on well-being and addressing the issues that sort of face men in midlife. And our second guest, Matt Bynes-Smith, specialises in coaching and mentoring young men in both their early teenage years and also in their sort of early 20s. Now, Matt is passionate about developing confidence in young people and empowering them to take control of life and the choices that they make, with a particular focus on toxic masculinity, emotional well-being and physical health. And Matt also delivers on our coaching in education diploma. So today, with the help of both Matt and Darren, we're going to be exploring the importance of men's health and coaching, and the stigma that still exists and the impact that this can have. So it's going to be a lovely, juicy conversation. So we're going to dive straight in. So welcome both of you back to Coaching Conversations. And I'm going to start because there are quite a few people here today where it's their first coaching conversation. So we'll go back and rewind and just ask you both just to share a little bit about your journey so far, where it all started for you. You know, I'm always very passionate to find out about people's why and their stories. It's, you know, it's what makes all of this just so interesting. So shall we start a little bit first of all with you, Darren, and just a little bit of an intro, and why this is really an important topic for you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Sharon. Hi, everyone. Great to be back. Really delighted to be here. In terms of I'll sort of spare you the life story, but in terms of sort of my coaching in this area and my interest, as you mentioned, I've had a career in sport and football development, and I'm still involved in that from a sort of consulting point of view. In terms of my coaching, I undertook the diploma back in 2017, or qualified in 2017. And I think after that, you know, there was talk about what's your niche, what area do you want to get into the most, and I was still sort of, you know, from that sporting background, working with sporting performers, particularly on transitions through, you know, once their career is finished, and what they wanted to do next. So coaching was great for those individuals. But as a niche, I was still working quite generally in sort of coaching circles, I suppose, just helping people in a general sense. More and more conversations I was having with friends, with colleagues of my age. So, you know, I am of a certain age, and these issues are really familiar to me, particularly in what I've termed the midlife anyway. So when we say midlife, I'm talking about sort of approximately between 40 and 55, but it could be broader than that. And what I kind of noticed was that there are a unique set of challenges for men in midlife at this point of their lives, many and varied and very broad. And I'd also sort of experienced some of those changes myself. So I took redundancy from the FA, for example, after 11 years, which was a big issue or a big challenge for me. That was kind of interwoven, that role, with my identity. A couple of years later, I went through a sort of relationship breakdown and a marriage breakdown. So I was then divorced. And these are kind of issues that, you know, not just this age, but certainly it's more prevalent at this age. You know, some of these sort of life transitions and challenges. So almost that niche was kind of under my nose the whole time, and I didn't realize. Having children, becoming a parent, some of these challenges are quite testing for men of this age. And what I was noticing was the fallback option was, if it reaches a certain point, well, I think you need to go and speak to someone. It's kind of often said, and that person is often a therapist. That's how sometimes we translate the support that's available. My view now is that there's a point before that. It's almost between the conversation in a pub or with a friend and therapy. And I think coaching kind of sits in that space between the two, whereby it's not just a conversation with a mate, but it's a structured conversation that empowers men to kind of take ownership, take control of their own challenges. So really, that's where I've started to work in that space a little bit more. We know about the suicide stats, the headline stats around, men aged between 50 and 54 have the highest rate of suicide, for example, and 1 in 5 men die before the age of 65. So in terms of men's health, there are some, it's not just mental health, which is very common. We speak about that now, which is brilliant. There's also physical health, and the two together. Some of these issues can impact upon both of those. So that's really where I've come from that. And it wasn't planned, this kind of journey through sport and now into this area. But I guess it's meaningful to me. And I feel that coaching can really help in these areas with men of a certain age.
Brilliant. Love that. And it's so important for us to raise awareness of the impact and the importance of the work that you're doing there, Darren. Thank you. Matt, over to you. So a little bit about you and your why.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. And hello to everyone again. I can't believe it's February. I thought it was a lot. I didn't think it was that far back, but wow, that has sped through this year. Okay, yeah, I mean, I'll try not to go through and unpack everything. It's quite hard to sort of pinpoint where things might have started completely, but from a coaching perspective, my background initially was in construction. So I spent a lot of time on sites as a construction project manager, which, as you can imagine, in some areas can still be quite patriarchal in the structures that manage and lead some of these areas. And I think I was sort of in my mid-20s getting very frustrated by the lack of honesty and collaboration in some of the projects that I was working on. And that nudged me to go and explore coaching as a tool to support those conversations, which led me to the coaching academy. And I think then for me, coaching again put a mirror directly in front of me and asked me, what do I want? Who am I? And I think then I started to explore those conversations, which led me to taking a complete U-turn in my career, retraining as a youth worker. Along the journey, there was a friend of mine who gave me a book, which I think this is, if some people might have heard of it already, Rebecca Asher. It's called Man Up, and within that book, it's a real lens and magnifying glass into sort of society structure around masculinity, and particularly when we unpack that phrase "man up," what do we mean and its impact? But in there was an organisation that I then reached out to and to become a volunteer, and they specialised going into schools and working with groups of young men and boys and having conversations around masculinity. What does it mean to be a man? And I think through that journey led me to sort of pulling my coaching qualifications in, and those group conversations that I was having, and particularly the conversations that I was having by myself, and thought, okay, well, this is a bit like Darren. It must have been under my nose and just needed a nudge to get there. Was I guess my desire to then want to go and support people on a one-to-one basis as well as group coaching. So that's what led me to, I guess, focusing in on this particular area.
Fantastic. And, you know, just from listening to both of you, we can see how it's so important for us to start to explore masculinity, men's health, men's well-being, and how that might be different for every man, adolescent, boy, you know, whomever it might be. And so, you know, something that is just so important, and as you both said, you know, it was right under your noses, but we don't often see what's there in front of us, do we? You know, but it's great that you've actually found that, and both of you doing such fantastic work. Darren, I'm going to come back to you before I start sort of unpicking sort of, you know, the younger age group and adolescents with Matt. But I know you've just finished a survey which you have been working on for quite some time, and the survey was on men and midlife. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you discovered from that, doing that survey?
Yeah, sure. Anyone that follows me on LinkedIn will see I sort of bang on about this all the time at the moment. So if you're not following me, then you're welcome to have a look at some of the content. So as I mentioned, I found myself having more conversations about with friends, with colleagues, and with men who were kind of, you know, I'd ask how they were, and they would be quite obvious, sort of dissatisfied with. They might not be overtly, but you know, the underlying dissatisfaction really with life, losing motivation, bored, going through the motions. They might have you know, it could be a decent job, well paid, settled life, but there was something missing, or that was coming through quite often. I felt I needed to perhaps rather than just my own experience and anecdotal experience, I needed something else to back up some of the understanding that I was developing around men in midlife. So I put together a short survey. It was a short survey, and it's sort of small scale research at this point, but something that I can keep coming back to. And there were some quite interesting responses, really. So things like, you know, the percentage of people that see themselves as middle-aged. Some men do, some don't, some haven't even thought about it. Whereas I'm quite a thinker, and I do think about these things and age and how life moves on and changes and transitions and all of that kind of thing. Some don't. You know, to some people it's not as important as others. The 3/4 of men, or around 3/4, rated their happiness as a 7 out of 10 or above. It varied between 3 and 9, I think it was. No one went for a 10. So just around sort of men's happiness and satisfaction with life, it's pretty good, but could be better, I would say, in terms of the responses. The top 3 challenges. So I asked men, you know, what are the big challenges in their lives at the moment. Parenting was the top one, and that's young children as well as teens, which perhaps reflects how, you know, over the years things have changed in terms of people's expectations around fatherhood and parenting. The second one was that loss of motivation, energy, focus. When individuals reach a certain point or a certain stage, sometimes we call it a career plateau. You know, things have been moving up and then they sort of suddenly start to level off. That can see a lack of motivation for people. And then the third one, and these are only the top 3, there's many others, but these are the kind of most prevalent: having few friends or not seeing friends enough. So that whole kind of social life, that social element to men's lives, which again had sort of dropped off perhaps after parenthood had sort of come in. So just taking those 3 issues, I think this is really good news for coaching, just because, you know, and there may be a need for a therapist around some of these issues, but certainly from a coaching point of view, I think these issues are ripe to be worked on with a coach. You know, how can we address some of the challenges with parenting, whatever they might be? How can we sort of re-establish some of that, recapture some of that motivation, that energy, that focus? And around the social side, you know, what could you do in order to you know, reignite your kind of social life, your relationships with far-flung friends or those close to home, for example. I think the other issue was around, you know, who men speak to around their challenges and their issues. And there's this stereotype, and I think we're going to go on to talk about stereotypes perhaps in a little while, but there is a stereotype that men don't want to talk or can't talk or won't talk. And I think this research and other conversations I've had suggests that men will talk and want to talk, but that it needs to be the right opportunity, the right environment, the right person to speak to. So again, really great news for coaching if we can get into the right places. 78% agreed there should be more support for men in midlife. So really high number. And only another opportunity kind of for coaching, only 15% had received coaching. So again, I think there's a real gap there in terms of people's awareness and knowledge and how we introduce coaching to this cohort. And you know, specifically for me, I know Matt's working with a different kind of range of ages, but for me, you know, around that midlife, just promoting coaching, what it can do for people. And then finally, just around the single biggest thing that would help, and lots of comments coming back about, well, more time, more money. And I think those responses showed perhaps there's a need to dig a little deeper into, you know, what are the real issues and what are the real solutions, which coaching can do, you know, if we start to probe and really get into some of those issues. So as I mentioned, if you want to know more, full details about the research, please get in touch. And my prime sort of communication channel is LinkedIn at the moment, but I'm also, you know, I think we'll cover at the end, Sharon, around how people might get in touch. So that was kind of a whistle stop around that research, and something I'm looking to build on over the next sort of few months and years.
Fantastic. So, you know, a couple of points I took away from that really is we do see coaches as well, primarily being, or predominantly, I should say, predominantly being like, you know, female, lots of female coaches. You sort of see them in the networks. Sometimes it's what you pay attention to, you notice more of course. And I guess, you know, that might be where my focus is. But it may well be that, you know, it is a prime opportunity for the male coaches and coaches in training that are here today. You know, you heard that statistic around the fact that, was it 15% you said, Darren, men had received coaching. So, you know, we say there's a coach for everyone, and for everyone there's a coach. You know, it looks like that, you know, that is a lovely untapped area to be sort of thinking about. And Darren, you said that it was an ongoing survey. So if there are people here today, either some of the females here that think, yes, their partners or their brothers or people in their network would like to be involved, or maybe we've got some male coaches here themselves that thinks, actually, yeah, that I'd love to be part of that ongoing research, they can contact you and potentially still look to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges which we might come on to is really, and I noticed this with International Men's Day, is awareness and getting to this group and this audience. So yes, absolutely. If people want to contribute and signpost, then great. Wonderful.
Fantastic. Thanks, Darren. Matt, you work with the younger age group, adolescents, young men, and we've spoken many a time over a coffee about the fantastic work that you've done, you know, both with the charity and also in schools and stuff. And, you know, and it's such fascinating work that you do and so needed. Would you say that from your experience that the challenges, etc., are similar or different to what Darren has found in his survey?
Yeah, there's absolutely similarities, and obviously because of maybe the age range, there's some differences. I think maybe then I'm just thinking, I've just noted down some of Darren's language there, and things like dissatisfaction and something missing, and I think there's definitely something important in those words as to where to explore. I also still do work, you know, I'm part of men's groups as well, with men who are, you know, over 18. And so I really relate to those words. And if we dig underneath them, the word that comes up for me is connection. And I feel that any age, there's still this desire to reach for connection. And I think that there's just maybe what word am I looking for here? Maybe just an incorrect way that maybe some men are reaching out to try and get that. And if I think maybe for younger age groups, that, you know, an age where they're really exploring their identity, they're exploring their friendship groups, their relationships, exploring what education means for them, maybe exploring different parts of their identity, gender, sexuality. It's a real intersectional conversation. Like you say, it's not one right way to be a man. And I think in workshops, when we explore that conversation, again, using something that Darren referred to before, is you really see that stereotype of maybe this belief that maybe men don't want to talk or boys don't want to talk really being split apart completely, because it's almost when this conversation eventually comes to them, they're like, oh wow, okay, I can have this conversation. It's almost like they've been waiting for it. Still maybe a little bit nervous that if they say something that is going to be vulnerable, put them in a vulnerable position, that maybe they're going to get squashed down or it's seen as weakness. So I still think that a lot of that conditioning is still there. So yeah, lots of similarities, lots of differences. I guess maybe the main one is that shaping of identity earlier on. You know, Darren referred to, again, those words, dissatisfaction, something missing later on in life. And I guess what I'd like to try and do with young people is for them to have that conversation earlier on. Who am I? What's important for me in the world around me? Who do I want to be? So that perhaps later on in life, they're not having, as I'm sure we're all going through existential parts, places in our lives at certain times where things come up. And I think it's nice still, you know, aspects of doubt or curiosity and questioning and being okay that your life might change in a different direction is something really important. But I think, you know, I'm just coming from my own lived experience, for example, you know, before I got to sort of high school and groups of boys, and really maybe when I look back, I don't think I could have used the language then, but in hindsight and reflection, feeling a lot of peer pressure and challenges on the way that I was to behave. You know, I came into high school and really enjoyed drama school and music, and was quite creative. And straight away, those things, I thought, okay, well, I probably can't do these things. And I zoned in and honed into a more of a sporting group. Not to say that I didn't get amazing things through that, but a lot of these other parts of me, I pushed down through fear of being ridiculed. And it's, you know, luckily further on in life, I've explored that and tapped back into those parts of me that are important. But again, yeah, just going back to what Darren said, if we can maybe have these conversations with adolescent men when they're younger, and bring that into their awareness, that hopefully they'll feel more empowered to decide their own identity rather than, you know, borrowing from other places and people or replicating what they think they should be, who they think they should be. I'll pause there. I'm sure we could unpack that a lot more and go down a lot more rabbit holes, but hopefully that answered a little bit of that question.
Yeah, totally. And I'm actually going to take the opportunity of unpacking it a bit more now. So
okay.
Both of you have mentioned stereotypes. So should we unpack that a little bit and maybe talk about why awareness of stereotypes is important, you know, and what you've experienced from the work that you've done sort of around that, which is both maybe empowering and inhibiting.
Do you want me to
carry Matt, do you want to go first, and then I'll go off to Darren after?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it's really important to understand. I mean, explore that conversation where what stereotypes people maybe are aware of. I remember the first activity that we would do in schools would be a word association game, and split groups up in the groups up into two teams and just write on the board write the word man, and then just get them to write the first words that come to mind. And then we'd also ask them to write the word women and ask what the first words that come to mind, and then we'd unpack those like conversations, where do these words come from, what impact do they have on people, and so you're really exploring there, are we borrowing these beliefs from friends, family, from culture, from our environment, from media, from films, books, where are all of these ideas around masculinity and being a man, where are they coming from? And just going back to what you just said then, Sharon, like, do they enable us or do they hold us back? And yeah, it's a really fascinating conversation to be part of. And I think there's also an amazing clip that dates back to, it's a TED talk from 2010, Tony Porter, who refers to something called the man box, and these sort of stereotypical behaviors that we see predominantly in men that would go on, if they're left unchecked, will go on to create, I guess, enabling cultures where more harmful conversations will come from, things like homophobia, misogyny, or the discrimination. So I think if we can get in earlier on and tackle and challenge and dismantle stereotypes, that really is some of the the work to be done right in the the enabling part of the conversation, that goes on to and a little bit borrowing some language that Darren said before, having conversations before they become too much. We've all heard about outcomes for men and some of the really horrific statistics in so many different ways where it comes to their health and well-being, education, discrimination, and that can be, again, looking at through an intersection lens, that could be down to class, religion, sexuality, race, ethnicity. It's so nuanced and complex. But the more that we can challenge, I guess, some of the enabling cultures, I think people can begin to feel more empowered there. And starting with stereotypes, challenging what does leadership mean? What's this, maybe a stereotypical version of leader? I could talk to you about the leadership that I saw predominantly in the construction industry, what I really think leadership is. What does power mean? And this grab, and we see it all the way up into our political systems, this grasp for for power against all costs. But actually, I think true power is about empowering others. So it's taking some of these words that we maybe associate with men, and unpacking them and understanding, are they enabling us? Are they holding us back? And going from there.
So powerful, Matt. And we know that words are incredibly powerful and subjective as well. We'll have sort of different sort of our own meanings to make sense of certain words. And I've done lots of work in group coaching around the word power and power over and power for ourselves and our personal power. Any of you that have done work with me will know that I talk a lot about personal power. Darren, coming over to you, how do you see all of this showing up? Because particularly, I know you've done lots of work, within sort of amateur, semi and professional sports, with the FA and, in your time as working as in your local authority as well. How do you see the whole sort of stereotype thing show up in that? And how does that impact the work that you do today?
Yeah, I think as Matt was talking there and thinking about stereotypes, and I guess as human beings, we like certainty and we like to think we understand the world, which even over the last 6 months, a year, is showing that it's changing rapidly. Then we can't keep up with the change. And I think when you think of stereotypes, we try and put people in boxes, which is reassuring to try and understand certain people or certain groups, and these things may or may not be true. They may have been true before. There may be a seed of truth in those stereotypes, but I think they can be dangerous as it can affect our behavior and our beliefs towards certain individuals or groups. And I think as coaches, we need to be non-judgmental. We need to role model behavior, which is not easy, and I'm certainly not perfect, and it's a difficult thing to do. We've all got our biases and our stereotypes that we will have. And I think interestingly now is what I'm seeing through the generations, there's almost like a generational set of stereotypes that, and as time goes on, obviously the generations kind of shift through, and new stereotypes maybe are coming through. And I think that's quite a complex web to kind of make sense of. But I think as coaches, if we can, you know, try and think about those kind of watchwords about being non-judgmental and being as open as possible and as understanding as possible, empathetic, we've got a better chance of kind of making sense of it in that sense. I think in the sporting world and football, you know, in terms of masculinity, you've probably got everything within that culture and that world. I often look for, you know, those champions within the football world and the sports world that are saying messages that kind of resonate with me. And I think that is changing. And I think, you know, as the generations kind of shift and we are moving towards that way. But yeah, there's everyday life, there's still challenges and difficulties, but yeah, it's a really interesting question around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know, there's lots there, isn't it? I mean, we can only talk from our own experiences. We can only, you know, and obviously we're talking very broad here, and you know, we're making some sort of general statements based on the work that we're doing, and each individual's experience is different, and we see the world as we are, not as it is. You know, we're looking through our own perspective, aren't we? Matt, I'm going to come back to you. So with all of that in mind, you know, how do we build the type of relationships that are needed with our male clients, regardless of if we are, you know, whatever gender we might represent, to support their well-being and identity?
Yes, great question. I mean, I'd go back to just the basic coaching principles of building relationships, first of all, and not trying to make it too complex from there. And understanding building trust really is so fundamental. And I think what along that journey, perhaps if we're having conversations around masculinity, around being a man, there's what can maybe bring up defensiveness is when someone's maybe stepping into a vulnerable position and that gets pushed back against them. So I think of coaches, particularly if we are working with maybe young men, you know, when I'm working with young men, is I'm really aware of allowing them to step up and show in their own time and pace, and being patient with that. Once, you know, it's the same with any relationship really, isn't it? You share a little bit of yourself and you're worried about whether that's going to be accepted and validated. And I think those are really key skills as a coach that we can be adopting in this area. There could be, for instance, when we're exploring someone's identity, or we're exploring things that they want to do in life, exploring hobbies, parts of their life that are important. If we have already taken a bit of time to unpack, I guess, someone's gender identity and being man, masculinity, then we could be asking questions whether there is gendered expectation involved in that topic that we're talking about as a coach, whether it be to do with maybe their future career or their hobbies or relationships. Just understanding, is this conversation impacting this conversation? So it's ongoing. It's very nuanced, which feels like a phrase to use to sort of get out of giving direct answers. It's complex, it's nuanced, but it really is. But I would really my trying to make it less complex is going back down to the absolute fundamentals of building any relationship. And that comes down to complete acceptance of the person in front of you, however they're showing up, validating their own experience, and building trust and taking patience and using patience along that journey. So I feel like those are the absolute fundamentals. And then on top of that, maybe you develop a trusting relationship where you can explore, you know, masculinity and actually bring in those phrases and conversations, and then further down the line, perhaps we're able to understand and raise awareness for the client as to whether there are any expectations on maybe the particular topic that you're talking about in a coaching setting.
Lovely, thanks, Matt. Darren, over to you. What about in the work that you do in building relationships with your clients so that you can explore well-being?
Unmute. I think similar to Matt, really. I think it's about the rapport that you build, the empathy, the listening. It's as basic as that for me sometimes, in terms of really respecting that person, where that person is, their starting point or where they are at that moment, and affording them the space and time to help that relationship kind of build, really. And I found when I try and explain what coaching is and how it benefits, it's hard to put into words sometimes, but I think that's where, for me, that kind of magic happens, is when you've developed that rapport, you've got that space, you feel relaxed to be able to really articulate what it is that's either holding you back, or maybe some limiting beliefs, and you're being prompted and asked the right questions. And I think that can happen, but you need the chemistry to be right between coach and client. So I think if the coach is open, understanding, listening, open-minded, non-judgmental. I think I just had a quick look in the chat, and there were some comments about perhaps older people, and I wouldn't like any of this to be sort of misunderstood, in that we're discounting the views of older people. That's not what we're saying here. I think we're trying to respect people's position, where they've come from, the history and their experience, with a view to using that to move forward in a positive way. So I think a lot of what Matt has said, really, and regardless of the group you're working with, you would look to develop that rapport, I think, with your clients in the same way, but having that extra knowledge and understanding of where they've come from and maybe some of the issues puts you in a good position.
Absolutely. When we have that deep level listening that we get through training to be a coach, and we come with that curious mindset, we're able to pick up the spoken and the unspoken communication, and we are able to start to think, that's interesting, let me unpick that a little bit more, around maybe how the client sees themselves, how they see their situation, which can tell us a lot about what potentially can be going on for them. Thanks, Darren. There's lots of talk, and we've spoken already about the word, quote unquote, masculinity and the language around it. And it's something that, I have, and I guess probably because of the work that I do, but I talk to my own sons about regularly. They're young men now, 21 and 24, and, we do unpick language quite a lot. And so what I'd be quite interested in is just to start to unpick both of your thoughts on this term, toxic masculinity. What does it mean? We talk about this stuff. What does it mean? So I'll come to you first, Matt, and then Darren, to you, the same question.
Yeah, great. If I can avoid using that term to have these conversations, I absolutely will do. Reason being is that, if you think about the word toxic, what comes to mind is I get words like poisonous and wrong and bad. So if for instance, if I step in with that conversation, I can understand why there's defensiveness to it. It will bring up maybe like an individual who doesn't associate with maybe behaviors that we're referring to when we're talking about toxic masculinity. And then they might interpret that as, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm toxic. So I'm going to borrow something. There was something on TikTok recently that I saw and there's someone called Dr. Brendan Kiyosaki. And I think he was doing his doctorate, and he referred to using the phrase restrictive masculinity instead, which I think and he went on to explain that the issue with using the phrase toxic masculinity is it doesn't actually identify what's harmful around that, and then it makes it harder to identify solutions. So, for instance, if we're using something like restrictive masculinity, it could be maybe someone is restricting their emotions. Maybe they are really feeling like they need to be self-reliant. And if we start to unpack that in a curious and open conversation, perhaps we can sort of, are those two instances, restricting emotions, needing to be self-reliant, are they always toxic? Not necessarily. Going back to what sort of Darren was saying before as well, that there might be reasons why someone is behaving in a certain way. Maybe they needed to restrict emotions because in their environment it might not be safe to do so. Maybe they've become so self-reliant because they've had responsibility thrust on them at such an earlier age, so they don't know anything other than that. So just to determine that as toxic, I think stops people from engaging in what could be really important conversations. So I think that when we reframe that and look at it from, has my culture, has my environment, things that have helped condition and shape my world, have they restricted who I feel like I am, or are they expanding who I am? That's where I think we can have a really more empowering conversation. And like I say, some people I think maybe have got on board with the phrase toxic masculinity, but for me, I feel like it maybe blocks people out from having some really, really important conversations that can expand to things like misogyny, gendered violence, and men's role in actually having those conversations. And again, going back down to what Darren said before, that could then empower men to just be checking in with their friends, having normalizing these conversations and feeling like they can access these conversations rather than and also being able to identify the hurdles to them. So that's my take on the phrase toxic masculinity, and also borrowing something that I thought really described it well from someone else who's doing lots of amazing work in that field.
Fantastic, Matt. Thank you for sharing that. It's not something I've come across before. Perhaps as I move over to Darren, you'll just pop that the guy doing his doctorate that you came across on TikTok in the chat box, in case anybody wants to sort of follow that up. That's great. And the term that he used. Thank you, Matt. Darren, over to you. Anything to add on that?
I agree with Matt. I'm not keen on the term. I think we have a challenge with mainstream media and what they kind of jump on a phrase or a term and it then gets used again and again, and it's far more nuanced than that. Similar to you, Sharon. Well, my boy's slightly younger. He's 11, so he's started year 7. I'm supporting him and parenting him in the best way I can. I do have worries, do have concerns about the next few years for him, but I think if we come from a place of having self-respect and respecting others, we're far more likely to develop men that have a positive self-view, which I hope mitigates against some of this behavior and some of this narrative that we're seeing. I mean, it's something I'm aware of. I don't engage with it. I don't point in that direction. I'm in a far more positive direction, I think. But I think as much as possible, it's about finding those positive role models, those positive influences, and calling it out and challenging it, as we come across it and as we encounter it.
And I love that, because for me, I mean, I've always held coaches and the coaching industry to a higher level than the rest of society, rightly or wrongly, but that's just my perspective, because we know when we train, that we are working with people with the, a frame of unconditional positive regard. We come with a non-bias and non-judgmental mindset. And so, you know, to be able to empower these types of conversations and to have them with our clients, so that our clients can also have them with their families and with their friendship groups and with their colleagues. I think, you know, we have the power to ultimately change the world for good, really. That's how I see things anyway. The time's just whizzed by, so I want to sort of spend the last few minutes with you both, just sort of getting you to share something each. And I always finish by asking all my guests to share something as either a learning takeaway or an inspirational message for people listening in today, whether it be live or on the replay, or maybe a particular coaching method that you think sort of highlights the work that you're doing. So I'll come back to you first, Darren, and then finish with Matt.
Yeah, I think the thing that really stands out is just this massive opportunity for coaching to contribute positively to the lives of men. Something I often say is, imagine if men were happier. So if we could move that 7 to an 8 or even a 9, you know, that would impact on them personally, but also, you know, imagine the impact wider than that, kind of on a macro level to everyone around them. And I think something I didn't say earlier, although I'm focused on this kind of group, that doesn't mean it's to the we're excluding women. You know, we've got to remember that women are kind of side by side on us here as allies and daughters and wives and spouses and so on. So and workmates, you know, in the workplace. So I think my message would be coaching can be a brilliant intervention for men who are showing some of these or experiencing some of these challenges. If we can deal with issues before they get bigger, it's, you know, it's on a sort of preventative side. And I think it's about empowering men to lead the lives that they want, and coaching can help them do that. Well
said, absolutely. And I know if we're not coaching men and we're coaching, you know, sort of women or anyone, actually, you know, they learn the tools to be able to share that much wider. Brilliant, thank you. Matt, on to you. What would you like to share with people today, an inspo or a takeaway?
Yeah, I was there going, oh, I wonder if I can think of some amazing quote to share at the end to wrap up. But I'll go with I can only go with my own lived experience, really. And I think it was someone that was, you know, brave enough to pass me a book that was all about the sort of conversations that I was having at the time. And when I was in a particularly vulnerable position, when I was you know, asking why I am the way I am, what's helped shape that, and wanting to go and find some support, that someone was there and helped me and validated that. And I think that everyone could be that for someone else as well, you know. And if we're talking at this month of November is all about accessing that conversation and allowing that to then flow throughout the rest of the year, it just becoming something that is normalized. Coaching can be that, you know, one of those touch points for someone to just have an honest and open conversation. And I've feel very blessed that this conversation did come into my life, because the benefit that I've had is such a richer and deeper experience in life, but particularly with relationships. And I think that's, you know, what we're all aiming for. So I did. On one last point, I think I keep saying the organization, the charity, they're a company that used to be called Great Men or Good Lad Initiative. They now have combined, and that you might have heard of Beyond Equality. And I would definitely, if anyone's interested, they do a lot of resources for conversations. And I've seen that they've got sort of starter packs for you know, conversations with young men as well. So I would definitely, you know, look for them as a resource. But there's so many people that are doing amazing work, all the way from musicians to poets, and people in corporate settings as well. So I think it's there can be inspiration found everywhere, and as long as the conversation continues, then people will find it much more accessible.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Matt, where can people find out a little bit more? Where do you sort of hang out virtually, where people might find out a bit more about what you do?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me on the Coaching Academy. I need to update a lot of I have taken a bit of a hiatus away from social media for a little while. So at the moment, I'm not on anything other than LinkedIn. And you can find me directly through the Coaching Academy's website as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. And Darren, how can people find out a little bit more about you? Where do you hang out virtually?
Yeah, as mentioned, LinkedIn's probably the best place. I am on other social media, but that one's probably the best. And also there's a website, frontfootcoaching.com. But always happy to have conversations. So yeah, look forward to hearing from people.
Great, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both for your time and your energy and your open sharing and very authentic discussions. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. I'm going to challenge you all. Well, first of all, if you feel challenged by this conversation, good, because it's the difficult conversations are the ones where we learn the most and we grow. This is where we step outside of our comfort zone into our stretch zone. This is where we grow. But I'm going to challenge you all. What is it that you are taking away? I'd love you to write one thing. Knowing is one thing, but doing is something else. What one thing are you going to do or action? It might be watching the TED Talk or checking out the TikTok video that Matt mentioned. But please do write down what it is that you're taking away yourself from today's conversation. Thank you all for your energy and your interactions in the chat box as always, because there wouldn't be a coaching conversations if you didn't join us. But on behalf of my two wonderful guests, Darren and Matt, and of course the gorgeous Saloni, who is always there in the background supporting me, thank you all for joining me. I look forward to seeing you our end of the year roundup on the 12th of December. But from me and from the whole team here at the Coaching Academy, have a great rest of your day. See you next month. Take care. Bye for now.